The Hawker Siddeley Harrier is one of the most iconic vehicles of the Royal Air Force, and one of the very few aircraft capable of vertical short takeoff and landing operations. During the Cold War era, it basically had only one counterpart: the Soviet Yak-38 strike aircraft. It took British engineers almost 10 years to get it ready for production, but it was all worth it. In the end, the Harrier became one of the symbols of the technological might of the United Kingdom. The story of the Harrier began in the 1950s. The Korean War allowed Western powers to test their cutting-edge jet-powered aircraft in combat, and they proved to be very powerful indeed. But there was a slight problem. Jets require a good, long runway. Even nowadays, there are many places in the world without access to a good airfield, and, unsurprisingly, good runways were even more of a rarity back then. Not to mention that in any modern conflict, airfields are a priority target for bombing. By the middle of the decade, British engineers were already really good at designing turbojet engines and supersonic aircraft. It was time for new, ambitious projects. In 1956, an engineer called Stanley Hawker was introduced to an unusual idea suggested by a French engineer, Michel Vibeau. He envisaged an aircraft powered by a Bristol Orion engine driving 4 centrifugal compressors mounted on sides of the airframe. The compressor outlet nozzles could both point straight down for takeoff and landing and point horizontally backwards for forward flight. Stanley Hawker saw the potential in this idea. He wasn't crazy about the original concept resembling a quadcopter, but he did like the vectoring notion. British engineers put their own spin on it and created a turbofan vectored thrust engine that received the name Pegasus and became the heart of their new aircraft. The project also piqued the interest of none other than Sidney Cam, the creator of the legendary Hurricane and the chief designer at Hawker, the company that eventually became the home of the new aircraft design. The next decade was all about ironing out all the kinks of the new engine and the Kestrel evaluation aircraft. The first prototype took to the skies in October of 1960, and in 1967, the military finally ordered 60 aircraft for service, which was designated the Harrier after a bird of prey. It was a subsonic ground attack aircraft primarily used for close air support. The first model of the Harrier series, called the GR-1, could carry missiles and rockets, several types of bombs, and 2 30mm Aiden cannon gun pods. The VTOL abilities of the new aircraft drew the notice of several countries including France, Argentina, and obviously the US. In 1969, the Americans ordered their own variant of the Harrier, designated the AV-8A. It became basically the same aircraft, but with the ability to carry a few other weapons and with some changes to its cockpit equipment. British Harriers operated from aircraft carriers and were also deployed in West Germany and in Norway. Soon, these strike aircraft proved their worth. In 1975, they were also deployed in Belize, a former British colony, to defuse tensions with Guatemala. The Harrier's VTOL capabilities were instrumental in this deployment, as it was only the RAF combat aircraft capable of safely operating from the short runway of the airport in Ladyville. By the end of the decade, the USA and the UK both modified their Harriers. The American upgraded variant was designated AV-8C, the British GR-3. The countries did it independent of each other, but the idea was pretty much the same, with a heavy focus on more advanced avionics, like the new identification friend or foe system. But the true crowning moment of the Harrier happened in 1982. In April of that year, the UK and Argentina, which was previously one of the countries considering the purchase of Harriers, engaged in an armed conflict over the Falkland Islands. The Argentine forces mounted amphibious landings and occupied the territory, with their navy and air forces following suit. On the one hand, British pilots were in a pretty tough spot, as they had to fight against supersonic Mirage jets. On the other hand, Argentine pilots only had outdated air-to-air missiles that were only effective against the rear hemisphere of an aircraft. That's when VTOL capabilities of the Harrier truly proved to be invaluable, as British pilots reportedly used VIFFing, or vectoring in forward flight, to force both enemy missiles and aircraft to overshoot, turning Argentine jets into easy prey. As a result, the UK lost only 10 Harriers, and not a single one was shot down by an enemy Mirage. In contrast, Argentina lost 20 planes, including both Skyhawk attack aircraft and Mirage fighters. The last Harriers retired only in the early 2000s. They even outlived their manufacturer Hawker Siddeley, which closed its doors in 1992. Their service history wasn't without problems, of course. For instance, the Harrier is considered to be one of the most accident-prone vehicles of the Cold War. Nevertheless, this highly innovative strike aircraft made for an excellent weapon in the era of global warfare, and thanks to its capabilities that were well ahead of its time, certainly earned its place in aviation history. Do you enjoy flying it? Come on, you lot, tell us in the comments below. We'd love to know.